we are joined by a woman who might have, because at the moment I'm assuming that all women, according to everything I read in the paper, are feeling betrayed by the actions of the government over this matter. Let's go and see if Hilary Calvert is feeling betrayed this afternoon. Hilary, welcome to the show. Do you feel betrayed?
Not at all. In fact, I was sitting here wondering whether you had to do your own cleaning in your office.
Yes, I do.
You were going to do cleaning after you finished the program, so I'm hoping that you're paid.
Well, I don't employ somebody, and it's because I'm not a lazy bastard at the end of the day, and I can do my own cleaning.
Well, that's jolly good.
What about you, though, Hilary? What about you? Do you have a cleaner?
No. I have had at some points in my life, and I've had people looking after my children and all sorts of things. I think and I hope I paid any cleaners I had the going rate, as it were.
Yes, well, I have to be honest with you. I have had cleaners in the past when I've had, lots of small children and me working all hours trying to make it all work. And I'll also be honest with you, the IRD was not involved. And I would think that was a pretty common a house cleaning operation in this country too, wouldn't you think?
What didn't surprise me, but is another sadness about how the media have fallen behind, I think, is that we've gone most of the distance up until probably Saturday. I noticed in the ODT, it might have happened around the rest of New Zealand, before we heard anything about what the pay equity claims was about. If you ask somebody on the street, they'd probably just say, oh, well, that's because rest home workers should be paid the same amount as nurses in hospital. That isn't fair if they're not. Or, they might come up with one of those sorts of things. But there was nothing anywhere that I could see that suggested what the actual changes were. And these are people who are saying it went through urgency. I don't think it's a long bill, but now act, the Amendment Act. So I think that even media people, who are busy people quite clearly, could have read it and got the guts out of it and given us some idea of what was happening. And they've had quite some time to do that, and they haven't. So I thought we could have a wee chat today about what actually the changes are in this new act.
Okay, well,
to see.
There you are. You're one up on me. You tell me, what's the detail of the changes that the government pushed through last week?
And this is from the ODT in the weekend. So the first change was raising the threshold predominantly owned by female employees from 60 to 70%, and for that to have been for at least 10 years. So clearly what had been happening was if the workforce was at least 60% female, then they were being hard done by. Well, I think 60% of the graduates of universities, med schools are now
and med school too,
women.
Yeah, that'd be right.
So I'm not sure whether that's, I think the men should have some sort of argument about that. But anyway, so 70% doesn't seem a lot to say they're predominantly female. You sort of think of something, when you think of predominantly female, you think of things where there's you hardly see a man there from one year to the next. But 60% wasn't a high threshold, and 70% shouldn't change that. It should have been, I'd have thought, 80% or something in the first place. But anyway, that's the first change, and it's, when I say first change, first noticed. The second is restating the purpose as requiring evidence of systemic sex-based undervaluation of work that's predominantly performed by female employees, so that's the 60% again. And along with that, evidence of systematic sex-based undervaluation of work. The amending threshold raised the claim limit from is arguable to has merit. Now, if you have a look at, and I'm looking at this as a lawyer, but you know that there's nothing that isn't arguable. You're prepared to pay a barrister, and that barrister will argue it. So
Yeah, that's
there's
right.
nothing that isn't arguable for a fee. And we approve of that in a general sense. You know, we think that people who, for instance, get caught with having somebody in with a knife, bloody knife in their hand saying he deserved it, still deserve a lawyer arguing their corner for them. So is arguable is not a threshold in a general sense. They've moved that from is arguable to has merit. And you'd have thought that all of these things already had to have merit, but no, apparently they didn't. So that's a very evil thing that perhaps Andrea Vance was thinking about, that something might have to have merit before you're allowed to get somewhere with these claims. Has merit is the sort of getting closer to what, when you see people being allowed to appeal, sometimes they're not allowed to appeal through the court system to the Supreme Court or whatever it is, unless the court that grants the right of appeal, unless this case has some merit. So it's a sort of a threshold that lawyers think about, but other people would, if I had said to you and you hadn't thought about it at all, should we let just anybody appeal forever right through the system and whatever the cost is? You might say, oh, only the ones who have, I don't know, have something going for them, you know, that some look at them. So that's another thing. They've said that these, when somebody puts this evidence out, it needs to have some merit. Well, that doesn't seem hugely evil to me, and picking on women, even if it was the woman. Introducing a hierarchy of comparators and adding more prescription to the methodology for comparison. And that's, I think that other people have thought that those weren't as tightly controlled as they should have been in the first place, but I don't know what the comparators are, and I might.
Oh,
if
well,
I
the
knew what
government
they
gave
were,
a number of them themselves, didn't they? I think
yeah.
they compared at some stage librarians with fisheries officers, for example.
Yes, or
That- that-
surveyors with early childhood workers or something. They just threw out there a couple of things which seems
yeah, I mean,
absurd.
the whole
But
notion is absurd, though. Trying to compare jobs is an absurdity
yeah,
because they are so
but we
different
don't
by
know the deep.
nature.
Yes, well, you sort of try and make sense of it by trying to think they're comparing only things that seem comparable, like nurses who work for somebody compared with nurses who work in a hospital, and that they're doing a similar job. So you think it's all even government money. So why are you distinguishing between them? That's the sort of thing you tell yourself is going on to make sense of it. You made a very valid point, I thought, about bus drivers. What you might do with drivers is to distinguish, therefore, rather than having school bus drivers, you might say, well, if you need to have a heavy, whatever it is, license,
A heavy, yeah,
then
heavy
that makes you
HT
different.
license, heavy
Yeah,
traffic. Was it heavy
because
traffic?
a van is not anything special,
But
and
let's
it's a
just try
limited.
that comparison though. It's a good one.
Yeah,
The comparison of cleaners with bus drivers is a really quite good one because those are the sort of comparisons that were being made. Oh well, there are X. We'll do X. Although I imagine that I don't know where cleaners would go, hygiene workers or something like that. Who knows? Doesn't matter. The point was that you could raise your own comparisons. So if you were able to claim under the legislation at the start, you just simply raised your own comparison and said, well, it's very similar to this. But there are no jobs that are similar. That's why they do the whole comparator thing, because you can't find a job that's exactly like yours. You've got to go and find something. And the interesting argument that Andrea advanced and a whole series of Labour people were using last week, and the Greens as well, it doesn't matter if they're not exact, or even if they're nowhere near it. The argument is at least you can start using the fishery officer versus the early childhood teacher, for example, you can use those and aspects of them as comparison when obviously they are completely different. And that's what the government's saying as
Yes.
well. Now, I wouldn't have thought that was going to
Yeah.
invoke outrage, but there you go, it has.